At some point in life, every one of us gets hurt. Someone betrays our trust, someone misunderstands us, someone speaks words that land harder than they intended, or perhaps harder than we expected. Sometimes the wounds are small. Sometimes they reach deeply into places where we feel most vulnerable. Hurt is a part of the human story. But over time, something else can begin to form around that hurt. A narrative, a way of interpreting what happened and what it means. And that narrative can quietly shape how we see the world. Two people may experience similar pain and walk away with very different futures. One person says, "I was hurt." Another begins to say, often without realizing it, "I am one who have been wronged." And those two sentences, though they sound similar, lead to very different paths. Today, I want to explore the difference between being hurt and living hurt. Welcome to Better Angels of Our Nature with Marcie Gourley, a quiet space where we slow down, think deeply, and explore the habits of heart and mind that help us become our better selves. If you're interested in the free supplemental journaling notes for this episode, head over to www.marciegourley.com or scan this QR code here.
Mug on the table, rain on the glass. You've been holding your breath, trying to get past the past. Better angels of our nature, sit down, stay a while. We'll name every shadow till it loosens its bite. Better angels of our nature, in the hurt, in the heart, finding room for a softer heart. Right here.
As a counselor, I've had the privilege of listening to many people talk about the experiences that shaped their lives. One of the most consistent themes in these conversations is the profound impact of relational wounds. A harsh word from a parent, a betrayal by a trusted friend, a season of rejection or misunderstanding. These moments matter deeply. But what often shapes the trajectory of a person's life is not only the hurt itself, it is the story that grows around the hurt afterward. Pain may enter our lives without permission, but whether that pain becomes the lens through which we see the world is something we eventually have to decide. Being hurt is a part of life. Living hurt is when the wound becomes the narrator of the story. In the introduction episode of this podcast, I talked about an idea that might sound unusual at first. The idea that hope can be an act of rebellion. Not the loud kind of rebellion we often imagine, but a quieter kind. The kind that refuses to let cynicism have the final word. The kind that insists goodness is still possible, even in a complicated world. But if we're going to talk honestly about hope, we have to talk about the thing that makes hope necessary in the first place. And that thing is hurt. Human beings are capable of extraordinary kindness and compassion. But we are also capable of wounding one another, sometimes deeply, sometimes in ways that linger for years. And if those wounds are left unexamined, they often begin shaping how we see the world. Resentment can turn into suspicion, suspicion can turn into cynicism, and cynicism, once it settles in, can make hope feel naive, even foolish, which is precisely why choosing hope sometimes feels like rebellion. It means refusing to let the worst things that have happened to us define the future. It means believing that healing is possible. It means choosing compassion when bitterness would be easier. So if hope is rebellion, then learning how to understand and heal from hurt is one of the ways that rebellion begins. Because hope does not grow in denial of pain. That would be like planting seeds among the weeds. Hope grows when pain is acknowledged and then transformed. And that is what we're going to explore today. Sometimes the anger, defensiveness, or cynicism we see is not simply disagreement. More often, it is the echo of wounds that were never fully healed. If you pay attention to the way people respond to one another today in friendships, families, public conversations, and in online spaces with reactive judgments, name-calling, gossip, and flippant words, you begin to hear something beneath the surface. You begin to hear the sound of unresolved hurt. It is learned. And how we manage that hurt individually and collectively shapes the emotional climate of our relationships and our culture. We have the power, the God-given ability to change our responses to hurt. Harriet Tubman was born into slavery around 1822 in Dorchester County, Maryland. From the beginning of her life, hardship was not an occasional experience. It was the environment in which she lived. Enslavement meant long days of forced labor, family members sold away without warning, and a constant threat of punishment for even the smallest perceived disobedience. One of the most defining injuries of Tubman's life occurred when she was still a young teenager. An overseer ordered her to help restrain another enslaved person who was attempting to escape. Tubman refused. In response, the overseer threw a heavy iron weight intended for the fleeing man. The object struck Tubman in the head. The injury nearly killed her. For the rest of her life, she suffered from severe headaches, seizures, and sudden periods of unconsciousness. By modern understanding, it was likely a traumatic brain injury. The physical pain never fully left her, yet the wound did something else as well. It deepened Tubman's spiritual life. During her periods of unconsciousness, she experienced vivid dreams and visions that she believed were messages from God. Those experiences formed the foundation of a profound faith that guided her decisions for the rest of her life. Tubman eventually escaped slavery in 1849. For many people, escape would have been enough. Freedom would have meant safety and a chance to build a new life away from the dangers of the South. But Tubman could not forget the people she left behind. Again and again, she returned to the South to guide others to freedom through a network of secret routes and safe houses known as the Underground Railroad. Each journey placed her in extraordinary danger. Slave catchers actively searched for her, and a bounty was placed on her head. Yet, she continued. Over the course of roughly a decade, Tubman made about 13 missions back into slave territory and helped lead dozens of people to freedom, while also providing instructions and support that enabled many more to escape. What makes her story remarkable is not simply her courage, but the way she carried her wounds. The injury that might have ended her life instead became a part of the story that shaped her strength. The physical pain she endured never disappeared, yet she refused to allow suffering to become the defining force of her life. Instead, her suffering deepened her conviction that freedom was worth the risk. Later, during the Civil War, Tubman served the Union cause as a nurse, scout, and spy. In 1863, she helped lead a raid in South Carolina that freed hundreds of enslaved people, making her the first woman in American history to lead a military expedition. Tubman's life reminds us that wounds do not always close neatly. Some remain with us for years, sometimes for a lifetime. But those wounds did not have to become the limits of our story. For Harriet Tubman, the injury meant to break her body became part of the journey that strengthened her spirit. Her pain did not end her purpose. Instead, it clarified it. The way we carry our wounds often determines whether our lives move towards bitterness or towards wisdom. When hurt goes unhealed, it rarely stays quiet. It eventually begins speaking through anger, defensiveness, and the way we treat one another. So what we need to do is name the hurt. What experience in your life most challenged your sense of control or direction? When you think about that experience today, what emotions still surface? Human beings are natural storytellers. We organize our experiences into narratives that help us understand the world. But sometimes the story we construct around pain becomes more powerful than the event itself. Psychologists studying something called interpersonal victimhood have observed an interesting pattern. When a person begins to see themselves primarily as someone who has been wronged, that identity can slowly shape how they interpret future experiences. That honesty is an important starting place. Healing never begins with denial. It begins with truth. At the same time, Scripture consistently warns about the danger of allowing hurt to harden into bitterness. In Hebrews 12:15, we read, "See to it that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." The imagery is striking. Bitterness is described as a root, something that begins beneath the surface and quietly spreads if it isn't addressed. From a psychological perspective, this aligns closely with what we see in human behavior. When hurt is repeatedly rehearsed in the mind, resentment grows. The wound that once needed care begins shaping how we see the entire world. Again and again, the biblical story invites us towards a posture of honesty, humility, and ultimately forgiveness. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. It does not mean that harm never occurred, nor does it require abandoning healthy boundaries. What it does mean is choosing not to let resentment govern the future of our hearts. In Colossians 3:13, we read, "Bear one another and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone." Forgiveness is rarely a single emotional moment. More often, it's a quiet discipline practiced over time. Yet when it takes root, it creates something remarkable. Space for peace, space for healing, and sometimes even space for renewed relationship. Biblical wisdom does not ignore hurt, but it gently reminds us that hurt does not have to define the rest of the story. When people experience deep hurt, whether through betrayal, loss, injustice, or trauma, one of the most significant things that is often disrupted is a sense of agency. Agency is the belief that we still possess the ability to shape our lives, make meaningful choices, and move towards a future that is not entirely determined by what has happened to us. In the aftermath of a painful event, that sense of control can feel diminished. The world suddenly appears less predictable. Trust feels more fragile, as though life is happening to us rather than unfolding through the choices that we make. This response is both natural and understandable. The nervous system is trying to make sense of a disruption in safety and meaning. Yet remaining in that place indefinitely can quietly allow the injury to define the trajectory of our lives. Reclaiming agency begins with a subtle but powerful shift in perspective. It is the moment when a person is able to say, with honesty and courage, yes, this happened to me, but it does not get to determine who I become. That statement does not erase the pain or deny the reality of what occurred. Instead, it reopens the possibility of authorship over one's future. Psychologists studying trauma have observed a phenomenon known as post-traumatic growth. While trauma can certainly leave lasting wounds, research also shows that many individuals eventually report meaningful positive changes following hardship. These changes often include deeper empathy, stronger relationships, a clearer sense of purpose, and a renewed appreciation for life. Importantly, post-traumatic growth does not suggest that suffering itself is good or desirable. Rather, it recognizes the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. When people process the pain honestly and engage in reflection, support, and meaning-making, they sometimes discover strengths that they didn't know they possessed. Reclaiming agency often involves several practical steps. It may begin with acknowledging the hurt without allowing it to become the center of one's identity. It often includes seeking supportive relationships, counseling, or spiritual guidance that helps restore perspective. Gradually, small decisions, choosing how to respond, how to rebuild, how to care for oneself and others, become the building blocks of renewed confidence. Spiritually, this process can also involve remembering that our worth and purpose are not determined solely by our circumstances. Many people find that faith provides a framework in which suffering is not the final chapter, but part of a larger story in which healing and growth remain possible. Reclaiming agency is rarely dramatic. More often, it is quiet and steady. It appears in the choice to take one more step forward, to try again, to imagine a future that is larger than the wound. Over time, these choices accumulate. What once felt like a defining injury becomes one chapter among many, no longer the whole story, but part of the journey that shaped a stronger and more compassionate life. Harriet Tubman offers one of the clearest historical examples of post-traumatic growth. Rather than allow suffering to narrow her world, Tubman allowed it to deepen her sense of purpose. Her injury strengthened her spiritual life, and her experiences of bondage sharpened her commitment to freedom. She transformed personal trauma into a mission of liberation. Psychologists who study post-traumatic growth often observe several patterns that appear in Tubman's life. One is a deepened sense of purpose. Individuals who have endured hardships sometimes develop a clearer understanding of what matters most. Tubman's suffering did not make her withdraw from the world. It clarified her calling within it. Another pattern is expanded empathy. People who know pain intimately often become especially sensitive to the suffering of others. Tubman risked her life repeatedly because she could not forget those still trapped in the conditions that she had escaped. A third element of post-traumatic growth is spiritual grounding. Tubman spoke frequently about relying on God's guidance and protection. Her faith gave meaning to the danger she faced and strength to continue when fear might have otherwise prevailed. Tubman's story reminds us that healing from hurt does not necessarily mean erasing the past. The wounds we carry may remain part of our story, but those wounds do not have to define the boundaries of our future. Instead, like Tubman, we can allow painful experiences to deepen our courage, expand our compassion, and sharpen our sense of purpose. Post-traumatic growth is not about pretending suffering was good. It is about recognizing that the human spirit, when supported by faith, courage, and community, has the remarkable ability to turn even profound hurt into a force for good. In that way, Harriet Tubman's life stands as a powerful model of resilience, not simply surviving injury, but transforming it into a life that helped others find freedom. When we move beyond living hurt, something interesting begins to happen. The emotional landscape widens. Curiosity returns. Relationships become less guarded. The future begins to feel larger again. The hurt remains part of the story, but it is no longer the entire story. And often, the wisdom gained through those experiences becomes something that benefits others. Pain, when processed with honesty and courage, can become a source of empathy and understanding. If your hurt became only one chapter in your life rather than the whole story, what might the next chapter look like? What would reclaiming agency actually look like in the coming weeks or months? Before we end today, I want to leave you with one quiet thought. Most of us carry wounds. Some are visible, so visible that our social media responses and algorithms reflect it. So visible, people take care not to step on the landmine of our wounds. So visible, it eats at us. Some are known only to us. But the deepest question is not simply what has happened to us. The deeper question is what we choose to do with what happened. Do we build our identity around the hurt, or do we allow the hurt to become one chapter in a larger story? The better angels of our nature do not deny pain, but they remind us that the story of our lives is still being written. And that means the future remains open and so very full of hope. Let hope be our rebellion against wounds, and more importantly, make room for our own growth. Until next time, let's hold steady and call our better angels forward. Thank you for watching. If you like this content, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. My book, 250 Great Things About America from Whitaker House Publishing, contains stories like Harriet Tubman's, and it debuts April 21st, 2026. And pre-orders are available now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever you find great books.